Good afternoon. And my name is Kathleen Dudley. I'm a holistic practitioner in New Mexico. And I have the pleasure to have a conversation with Dr. Chris Lowthert. And Chris is in Virginia. Chris is a chiropractor. And why I'm so delighted to be able to have this interview with Chris is because Chris's chiropractic practice is based on the foundation of German New Medicine. And I'm not sure how many of our listeners or viewers know German New Medicine, but we're going to do a series of interviews and we're going to delve into German New Medicine. And Chris is going to explain the beautiful, simplistic healing properties that we all have access to through this wonderful process of our body's own natural healing methods. So Chris, I wondered if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, and thank you very much for the conversation today.
Yeah, Kathleen, this is great that we have this opportunity. As you said, I'm a chiropractor and been a chiropractor since 2004. Started out mainly as a sports medicine type of chiropractor. But that quickly changed back in 2006 when I discovered, through a distressful situation in my own personal life, we discovered German New Medicine. And German New Medicine is the body of scientific work discovered by Dr. Rieker Geerdhammer from Germany. And so very early on in my chiropractic career, I was privileged to have this body of knowledge to be the foundation of my body work, chiropractic work. So now fast forward, here I am down in Virginia, in the rural section of Virginia, thankfully. And I continue to do chiropractic and share Dr. Hammer's work known as German New Medicine with my community here. So,
thank you. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about, the history of how did Dr. Hammer come upon German New Medicine? And so, I mean, how long is this methodology being available to people through his work?
sure. Yeah, Dr. Hammer was a medical doctor in Germany and was practicing medicine conventionally, as we would say, through the 60s and 70s. And then in 1978, while the family was in Italy, they received the unexpected tragic news that their son, Dirk Hammer, was accidentally shot by an Italian prince by the name of Victor Emmanuel of Savoy. Dirk suffered tremendously following this gunshot wound, and the shot occurred in August of 78, and then in December of 1978, Dirk passed in the hands and arms of his loving father. Well, several months after that, Dr. Hammer developed testicular cancer. So Dr. Hammer immediately sensed that there was a direct connection with this unexpected distress that he just suffered through, along with his wife, for months and months, until finally their son succumbed to the injuries, but still that distress was there. And then shortly after, say several months now, after the death of his son, Dr. Hammer developed symptoms, which was then diagnosed as testicular cancer. And this here was the beginning of an amazing journey that completely flips the medical paradigm 180 degrees. 180 degrees, he just flips it up and brings us this method of medicine, let's say, but using that term more aligned with indigenous medicine, let's say, not the pharmaceutical sense of the word that so many people are familiar with, but the medicine, the plant medicine, earth medicine. So Dr. Hammer knew that there was something else there that was manifesting so-called disease. And so he quickly began. He was in Munich, Germany, as an internal medicine doctor working in a cancer hospital at this time, when he started to question what he's been taught and question what we look at as called disease. And so he quickly began to just listen and converse with his patients. And he quickly found that each one went through something distressful prior to their diagnosis of cancer, or their manifestation of the symptoms of what we call cancer, right? And so he started to see the role of the psyche, and he correlates it with the body, the organ. And at this time, back in the early 78 to the early 80s, this connection between the psyche was in mind, let's say mind body was there. There was a lot of talk about it within medicine at the time of Dr. Hammer's, discoveries here. So it was nothing new, but yet there was something new about what Dr. Hammer was revealing here. You might be familiar with the work of Hans Selye.
I am not. Please.
And Hans Selye spoke about how stress created disease or caused disease. And how often do we hear that? It's particularly in holistic medicine, right? Or alternative medicine, how significant stress plays. And I'll touch upon where stress plays within this paradigm, this new paradigm of health and healing. So it was a different quality, let's say, in intensity of stress that Dr. Hammer was discovering here. And what he discovered was, first and foremost, this event that occurs in one's life is unexpected.
Yes.
Something catches us off guard. Yes. We weren't paying attention. It just happened, boom. We didn't know it was coming.
Right.
We've all felt this type of event in our lives. Another key component to this event, and this is very, very important to hold and let kind of float there as we speak about German New Medicine, but it's this subjective nature of this unexpected event, this unexpected distress. It's a subjective event in the sense that you and I could be in the same room together and receive the same news, unexpected news, and you're going to respond differently than I will, possibly, right?
Yes.
And there's also this chance too that collectively we would all respond in a similar way, right? But there's this subjective nature to this unexpected event, and how we subjectively perceive that event, that unexpected event that's happening in our life existentially. How we perceive it is going to be determined how the symptoms at the organ level manifest themselves. So for example, in German New Medicine, we speak of biological conflicts. We don't speak about psychological conflicts or mental conflicts in a sense, like kind of separating the psyche out here, right? We speak of biological conflicts where the psyche is an integral component, actually 3 components, an integral component within this biological conflict. And the brain is the mediator between the psyche and the organ, okay?
Yeah.
So now we have the 3 components, the psyche, the brain, the organ, working as one biological unit, let's say, right?
It's a beautiful system.
Oh, and yet simplistic. It's only 3 components. That's all we need to know about, right?
A wonderful triangulated.
How about that, right?
Yes, that's lovely.
Right. So, so yes, we have these 3 components, and in those 3 components, and we'll touch more on these components as we unfold here, these basic principles of German New Medicine. These 3 components experience a biological conflict simultaneously, in synchronicity, okay? And that biological conflict is, like, as I said, is unexpected and highly subjective. When you're going through a distressful situation and you experience what we call a death fright conflict, where your life is in danger, you're literally fearing your life, say a wartime situation. This death fright impacts the psyche immediately when it happens. It also simultaneously impacts the brain at a particular area of the brain. And where that impacts the brain is going to be determined by how the psyche perceives that situation. And so if we are talking a death fright, which is determined subconsciously the moment the unexpected shock happens.
Yes.
Okay. Boom. Subconsciously, the signal hits the brain, the impact hits the brain, the psyche, and then there's a biochemical message sent from the brain. And in this situation, from the brain stem, because this is where the lungs, the alveoli tissue of the lungs in particular, is located in the brainstem. Now, the alveoli tissue of the lungs are those air pockets, those air sacs that we've seen in our study of anatomy, possibly, or physiology. There's all these small air sacs all through the lungs, and those air sacs are called alveoli tissue. And the biological function of the alveoli tissue is to absorb oxygen. And so nature, it emerges in nature, this design in the lungs where we have all these little pockets of air, right, that increase the surface area of the lungs. And so we can have very efficient oxygen consumption, right? Well, what if this unexpected shock happens and it's a death fright? And that biochemical message is sent from the brain immediately to the alveoli tissue, and those cells in the lungs start to proliferate. And depending on the intensity of this distressful situation, this death fright, will determine how quickly the alveoli tissues and the cells multiply, forming more alveolar tissue to increase the surface area of the lungs so that we can absorb more oxygen to give us a little bit more of an upper hand to adapt, to survive this unexpected shock, known as a death fright. Now that increased alveolar tissue, again, picks up and it enhances, let's say, enhances the biological functioning of the lungs. Now here's the kicker. Those extra tissue, and I know you know where I'm going with this, that extra tissue all through the lungs now, within conventional medicine and alternative medicine, will diagnose that extra tissue in the lungs as lung cancer. And depending on how fast it's proliferating, that's how many tumors are forming in the lungs, right? The most common way that this type of biological conflict is experienced right now is through the diagnosis shock of cancer in patients. So patients go into the hospital, they go to their doctor to see what the symptoms mean. And then all of a sudden they're given a diagnosis that you have cancer. And that is oftentimes perceived as a death fright. And now cancer cells, quote unquote, have appeared in the person's lungs. And now they're being diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer.
Wow.
How often have we heard this?
More often than we want.
Sure. So this is the problem, right?
Right. I like to use the terminology allopathic medicine, the pharmaceutical-based medicine.
Sure.
In contrast to the holistic realm of healing. And that's a beautiful explanation of the shocking difference between how holistic medicine and New German New Medicine sees the symptomology and how disease is looked for in allopathic medicine, rather than actually looking at the symptom as being the body's roadmap to healing. The contrast is just remarkable and brilliant.
Well, this is what flips it all, the whole paradigm of disease on its head in a very quick samurai-like motion, really. It's that we're now not talking about dis-ease or malignancy or the body breaking down or the body has a weak immune system and it's being invaded by some external mysterious creature from outer space. This doesn't happen. The genetic defects don't happen. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm of health and healing, there's a significant, meaningful biological process that takes place when, for some unfortunate reason, we go through an unexpected, distressful situation. And so it gives us a way of handling this part of life that we can't control.
Yeah.
It puts us, it grounds us. It doesn't prevent it from happening, but it puts us in a much more advantageous position. The odds are greater when you're working within this paradigm. The role, the integral role of the psyche, and how the psyche really is driving this biological unit, but yet it's intimately involved in the most complex systems of our body: digestion, reproduction, just blood cell production. It's all being mediated by the brain, and yet the psyche is right there too, right? Yeah. So it's this paradigm that puts us at an advantageous, on a grounding that no matter what comes at us now, we can figure out where we're at, right? Get our bearings, look at what's happening in our life existentially, flip it around a little bit, change it around, see what we can do. And this is the practical application that we can speak of later of this new medicine. And it's going to be unique for you because of your background. It's unique for me, how I apply it. Each one of us, depending on where we come from, are going to apply these basic principles. And I would say pristine syntax, the language that Dr. Hammer used to describe an emotional component of the psyche that's grounded in our biology. We need to stick with that. We need to stick with the death fright conflict. We need to stick with a separation conflict, a territorial loss conflict. And so as we learn these different conflicts in that emotional theme, it grounds our NLP into our biology to give us, again, an upper hand on, okay, what's going on here? What's going on in my life that's giving me this cough, right? This nagging cough. Nothing major. It's just a nagging cough. And I have a symptom. Well, we can learn a little bit about basic anatomy of the lungs, right? How the bronchial tubes are, there, and how it branches out into the alveoli tissue, as I said earlier. And we got to get to know a little bit of the basic anatomy and tissues that form the lungs, but we'll quickly find that a cough is related to the bronchial mucosa, the lining of the bronchial tubes in our lungs. And that cough comes about once we resolve a territorial fear conflict. A territorial fear conflict. And what I mean by once we resolve, so the psyche is impacted by this unexpected shock, right? So that's the first place it hits. And then simultaneously, boom, the brain and organs affected. The conflict resolution, how we put this conflict behind us, how we resolve it, how do we move through it, how do we handle it, is a very subjective event also. But once we do, this is the most important, once we do get through that and we resolve it in our own unique fashion, then the symptoms come about. The symptoms of healing, not the symptoms of illness or disease, right?
Could I interject for a second?
Sure, yeah.
Well, you know, this goes back to some things you were saying just prior to this, but then to get to this most current point. But it appears that in order to break through the current paradigm into the new paradigm of healing, it takes a personal experience in almost every circumstance. I think of Hahnemann and his development of homeopathy some 200 years ago, and you know, your own experience. And I had a healing crisis as well, and became aware of the body's natural healing capacity. But I was able to pinpoint the shock that you're talking about right at the moment. And then the cancerous lesion occurred that night, and it was there that morning. And it was so immediate that there was no way I could miss it. And we have been so conditioned to fear symptoms,
right,
that it's, and with German new medicine, what you're describing, we embrace the symptom and we embrace the knowledge of what our body is doing in response to that shock. And through that, we embrace it with love, and with no fear. And it's that lack of fear and that educational awareness that the body is doing its precise healing methodology that we can trust. But again, we have been so conditioned into the fear symptoms that we have no empowerment. But what you're talking about with German New Medicine, we become empowered in this process.
Absolutely. It flips the tables. There's yeah, I mean, once you really ground into it and then experience life through these lenses, experience life with your own shocks, right, that we all have, experience the symptoms as we go through that learning process with this knowledge now, it's a game changer. But it's work. It's
Yes.
significant work, and it can be very, very difficult work to do within the current environment. And so, yes, we do rip out at the root the fear of disease.
Yes.
Very quickly. But that fear creeps in for a lot of people, especially early on in their learning of German New Medicine. It'll creep in and you'll have these conflicting narratives, right? You know, and you start to question German New Medicine, start to question Dr. Hammer's work. He couldn't have had it all right. You know, he couldn't have had it so pristine and perfect. Now, I don't even like the word perfect, but so airtight that there must be a hole in this somewhere. And I looked for it too early on. It's just part of the human nature to question and to be a skeptic of sorts, right?
Discernment.
So, huh?
Discernment.
Discernment, right? Yes, discernment. And so, yeah, early on in this learning process, through and learning it, hopefully the easier way, like taking time to sit down and read the information that's out there, particularly German New Medicine, learninggnm.com. Watch the videos, you know, and have conversations, start little study groups, which we have here, right? But anyway, we're kind of diverting. This is certain things that we can speak about later on, but I want to get back to that fear and then where the stress comes in, because the stress and the fear often come hand in hand, right? And I think it's real imperative right now as we go through this major crime in progress to really get our bearings here, so that most importantly, you, whoever it may be that may have a symptom of sorts, just takes the break and kind of steps away and just tap into that instinctual nature, reconnect with nature, because this is the reason why we're in the mess we're in, is a complete disconnect with nature and our source of life. And it's been centuries of this disconnection from the natural world. And so we instantly can reconnect to that nature within us, in our own biopsyche, right?
Yes.
Pay attention to what's going on outside us. And that starts to entrain and tune our psyche to the natural rhythms of life, right? And certain conflicts do come up, certain times a year maybe for people, right? But again, that when the symptoms arise, look at the symptom as a guide to kind of point you to that component of your biopsyche that was impacted by a particular event in the past, maybe, right? And see what you get back in that biofeedback. Stay open to what you receive intuitively Just like Dr. Hammer knew intuitively that his testicular cancer was directly related to the death of his son. It doesn't take much to realize that. But again, we're not even just talking about these big shocks either. We're talking just little stuff. You know, a little unexpected comment from your spouse or a coworker or your boss, right? These unexpected things pop up all the time in our life, right? And so there's no shortage of opportunity to learn German new medicine, let's just say, right? And we don't have to really start off with the big stuff like the cancer and all this, you know, really difficult healing process. But we can start off with the stuff he knows, the little occasional back pain, the neck pain, right? And start to tap into that biofeedback loop that's involved with your psyche and your brain and your outside world, and see what happens. And you can't not handle the situation in a much different way, an empowered way, because you're tapping into your own resources. You got everything you need.
Right. When is our own, you know, we know our bodies and our minds better than anyone else.
Sure.
Yes. And, you know, I can't help but think, I was very involved in veterinary medicine for a while and saw a lot of dogs and cats that were diagnosed with diabetes. And interestingly enough, in every single case, there was an abandonment issue pertaining to that dog or cat. And I then began to look at people that I knew that had type 1 diabetes, and I'm not as clear about type 2 diabetes, but there was always an abandonment issue.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times our animals are easier to see, and they're our teachers in many ways that are not as complicated.
Certainly. And if we have animals, we can certainly begin to learn these biological laws that we speak of today with our animals, together with our animals. And that's exactly how Dr. Hom, yes, perfect timing.
She must have known. Her name is Rose, and she adopted me a year ago.
Oh, nice to meet you, Rose. Welcome to the party. Oh, she just yawns, so I must be boring her. But
I don't
anyways, he did the same thing when he was going through. And just imagine Dr. Hammer's psyche as he was uncovering this work, these revelations coming to him, deep revelations that completely turned his whole education on his head, right? He struggled with it, as we all do at times with life. We struggle through it. And he continued to go forward with this and observed nature and observed his animals, observed his patients, and listened. And there was the feedback loop, right? There's the feedback loop. Listen. And yeah, some people need to externalize their conflict. So we need people to talk to, right? Some people, right? We all have our own ways of handling our biological conflicts. But it does help if you have someone that you can, you know, speak about intimate situations in your life, so you can. And so that's what really the role of the practitioner starts to become, right? This doctor is no longer this all-knowing on the pedestal. Yeah, we know a hell of a lot when it comes to German new medicine, a hell of a lot more than that cardiologist or oncologist down the hallway in the hospital. I can, you know, up and down, but we have knowledge that we hold as we interact with people, and that interaction creates a safer place out of fear, and you're listening to what's going on in their psyches, and you help them kind of pinpoint it, and then help them just discover on their own way how to handle it. how to handle it. Because again, it's such a unique process. So there's not one way of resolving our conflicts.
Chris, excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah.
And another thing too is we've been taught, we've been trained to have an immediate response to a symptom that we want to get rid of.
Yeah.
And so to be willing to change the perspective, to actually sit and listen and pay attention without fear, but with curiosity. I like to call myself an anthropologist from Venus, and I would call you an anthropologist from Mars. And we sit back and we observe. We remove ourselves from the first person to the third person, and actually put some space in between to be able to then be discerning. Sure. But there's so much conditioning to, number one, jump into fear rather than empower ourselves into the love of what our body is doing. And it's that beautiful machinery of healing for us, this sacred vessel that we all are. And then to want immediately to have everything resolved, even though perhaps what we had done was part and parcel with why the symptomology occurred. So, yes. So how do you address that part of it? Because some symptoms and some disease can take a while.
Absolutely.
Because we have to resolve the conflict. And if I could say one more thing, that was one thing that I learned early on when I was dealing with my cancerous lesion. And I spent the first part of my healing process writing a 2-sentence statement about the conflict. Mm. And what was curious was, as soon as I wrote that, and it took me about 3 weeks to get it down into enough of a concise précis to get that entire essence of it, then the healing began.
Sure.
But it takes that, and you spoke to that. So we have to breathe deeply enough and have faith in our bodies and faith in ourselves to allow the medicine to work. And if we're in a rush and if we're filled with fear, then we stop the entire process of German new medicine healing.
Yeah, it certainly hinders it. I don't know if it'll stop it unless the fear is so extreme, right? But there's part of that just continues. And this explains why people get hung up. So they get into a healing where we call it a hanging healing. Right? And they get hung up into the biological program. It's running, but certain triggers occur. Certain fears creep in, and it prolongs the healing. The healing continues, but then there's a prolonging of the healing, right? And then it's also too knowing what preceded the healing. Because if you spent 4 months in conflict activity, the signs and symptoms of conflict activity are very, very simple. We develop cold hands when we're conflict active. So our extremities get cold because our cardiovascular system contracts. Yeah. So our hands, right? We lose our appetite. We're not hungry. Mm-hmm. We have sleep disturbances. And so oftentimes we'll wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing that's popping into our mind is the conflict. Yeah. Right. And so this is signs of conflict activity that can ping us, get our attention if we're tuned into it. If we know the new medicine, and we're tuned into what conflict activity feels like and is, right? We can detect it very early on, but oftentimes it can go unnoticed. and if it's prolonged. So prolonged conflict activity means that there's going to be prolonged time of healing. This is a biological law. It's the two-phased response. It's the two-phase of all so-called disease. And it goes through this wave, right? And so we can be up here and really conflict active for a period of time, and we're working it, you know, we're fully aware that we're in it, right? And we can learn how to downgrade it as best we can so we can come to a rational, logical resolution so we can move through this quickly, so our body can heal quicker, right? But sometimes it gets caught up, and then we'll have symptoms that lag on for a little bit. And as you said, we have to be patient with that process at times, but yet we don't not do anything. This is a pretty common, I would say, emotional reaction trigger I get when I'm teaching with people, especially in person, you know. Oh, are you saying you don't do anything? Are you saying you don't go to the doctors? You don't do this? No, I'm not saying not do anything. Fortunately, at this day and age, we have so many modalities at our fingertips now that actually truly verifiably support the natural healing of the body.
There's
And
so
as long
much.
as it supports the natural healing of the body, any modality is welcome within the new medicine paradigm, as long as it's supporting it, right? And at the same time, if you need to take an antibiotic or go to your medical doctor for whatever reason, go ahead. Particularly, surgery is an option and can be a life-saving option at times for people. So this idea that people within the German New Medicine cult are totally anti-medical and blah, 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 that's completely bogus. But there's actually a lot we can do.
Well,
And it's
Chris, just excuse me a second.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so new to German New Medicine, I can't even claim that I'm in that group per se. But my own healing practice has been aligned with it. But I must say, I am one of those folks who does refuse the toxic medicines. And
Sure.
I'm pretty hardcore in that sense. And so you would
And
find
you're not alone, Kathleen. You're not alone. There's many, many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how much trust I do have in the body's innate capacity to heal, if we do the correct aiding processes during that healing crisis. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think this is a perfect time to bring in that analogy, let's say, of the wound healing, right? That we
Yes.
spoke out before we got on. It's very natural that if somebody is healing a situation that's internally, it's different than if we are healing a busted elbow, right? So we fell off our bike and we really scraped up our elbow, and it's nasty looking, it's pussy, it's red, it's painful. So we're not able to move our elbow as well. But what do we do typically? It's somebody that has common sense left, right? It's like common sense tells us we go and wash up the wound a bit, right? Maybe put some salve on it, or comfrey, or some form of ointment, right?
Calendula maybe, or St. John's wort.
There
Yeah.
we go. Right. There's whatever, you have at your disposal, and you're putting it on there, and then you wrap it up, and for a couple of days, you're not going to be able to maybe use that elbow. It's going to be tender, but there's something about that process that we're completely comfortable with allowing to happen. And you were very comfortable with the symptoms Yeah, it's discomforting, it's painful, but yet it's just an elbow wound, right? That's healing the same way that gallbladders heal, the same way the pancreatic ducts heal, the same way that the bronchial mucosa heal. It's the same way.
Chris, do you remember maybe 20 years ago hearing that the only part of the body that can heal itself is the liver? Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, well, I remember hearing that. Well, we know that if you have, problems with your liver, it can regenerate, it can heal.
Sure, yeah, yeah. Imagine that, right?
And imagine that.
Yeah.
And what's so beautiful and delightful in all of it is that the entire body can heal itself.
Right. We have these special biological programs to assist us during unexpected distress and to assist us in the natural healing from that distress. And you can go on our website here, Learning GNM, and you can read over 150 special biological programs that relate to all the systems of the body, from respiration to digestion to reproduction to blood making, you name it. You name it. And you can go on the index A to Z and literally scroll down and find your symptom that you're challenged with. Click on that link and go to an explanation as to why you have this particular symptom. All right there. And so it's an amazing opportunity that we have, particularly the English speaking world, because this is why Dr. Hammer presented his postdoctoral thesis to the University of Tübingen in 1981.
Wow.
And they have refused to review his postdoctoral thesis to this day. This is unheard of within the academic world. They do not want to know what Dr. Hammer knew back in 1981. And that's where the fight really started for Dr. Hammer.
Seriously, his knowledge of what he's discovered with the stress related body situated disease was refused when he presented it at the university.
1981, he presented what we're talking about right now, the significance of the unexpected distress, the role of the brain in the manifestation of these certain diseases, and the correlation to the organ. That was all presented in his postdoctoral thesis to the university in 1981.
So how has this medicine come about? If it was censored at the university level,
yeah,
in his studies, then how has it come out into the world, and who becomes familiar with it? How does that happen? Is it?
Well, really just Dr. Hammer's drive and determination to just stand up and take a stand to the enemies of life that wanted to suppress this humane medicine.
Wow.
He took that stand and he held it strong until he was 82 years old. He just passed away July 2nd of 2017.
Oh, wow.
And he lived in a life where they chased him around all through Europe, stripping him of his medical license, locking him up in a high security penitentiary in France for years in solitary confinement.
No.
Back in the early 2000s.
Wow.
They know that what Dr. Hammer has discovered is the biggest challenge ever that the medical establishment will face and has faced. And there's no, and how it has gotten out was through that determination, but the determination of many other people
Like
that
yourself.
have recognized the beauty of this work and the truth of it, made it their own, and began to share it. That's how it emerged. And it emerged and emerged. And I have to say, I'm very privileged to work with Carolina Markelin, who is my teacher, who introduced me to German New Medicine back in 2006, who spent years on this website, learninggnm.com, to translate all of Doctor's German work into English.
Wow.
For us to speak about it, to learn from it.
Wow.
But most importantly, to acknowledge that it's here, acknowledge and give the individuals the recognition that it deserves.
Wow.
But yes, this is unprecedented times. And so it came about, it emerged. It's just like anything else emerges in nature, right? It emerged, some things emerge through conflict. Some aspects of life emerge through symbiotic nature of life, the mutual aid of one another. It emerges. It's constantly emerging. Life is constantly emerging.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes things emerge through conflict, right?
Well,
and this is often how we discover German New Medicine.
right. And we generally grow as individuals when there is a conflict that we're brought up to face. And it's through that where we bring our courage and we face that conflict, and we learn through that. And this is exactly what's happening today in the last year and a half of this, this crisis, this war, and so we're learning, and we're constantly learning, and there's a very big divide, and the divide shows allopathy and pharmaceutical medicines, and on the other is the holistic paradigm of healing, which is German New Medicine in its beautiful system.
Yeah.
And incorporating, as you say, all the different modalities that support the healing process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much different ways we can go with this conversation, in the sense that there's once we get the groundwork, right,
Mm-hmm.
and what we're working, the foundation of what we're working with, then it's discussing the application. How do we apply it? And like you said, somebody that's new to this is coming to it. They may be in a distressful situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to want answers like, well, how? But unfortunately, that is not the optimal time to be learning German New Medicine. And this is coming from experience with working with people.
Mm-hmm.
The optimal time to learn German New Medicine is when you're in really good shape, you're vibrant, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you don't have any symptoms, right? That's the time. That's the time to learn it. That's the time to share it with your children. But unfortunately, people do come into it when they're in a distressful situation. And so the expectations have to be managed, right? What do they expect? What are they expecting through this German New Medicine, right? You got to make sure that you know that there's some work that needs to be done with oneself, with removing some of the old narratives, associations that we may have with our symptoms, and ripping them out. Sometimes it's hard to rip them out. So I often tell people, just kind of push them to the side a little bit, right? Like, we're not telling you to get rid of everything there that you learn, but let's just push it to the side and stay within the framework of German New Medicine. and see what comes about it. Again, if there's a lot of pain, a lot of symptoms, that individual may have to manage that and handle that differently versus somebody who, like you and I, that are in very good shape and healthy, begin to learn German new medicine, right? So
Right.
learn it early,
Right.
learn it when you're healthy, and you're going to be much better off. And it'll continue, it'll continue to build as you live life.
That's true. That's definitely the ideal time, but that's not often when it happens. And
Right.
it certainly wasn't for my own personal experience, that I can guarantee it. It certainly can. We can go through a crash course and incorporate even at the time of crisis.
Yeah.
But Chris, so we've been talking for the majority of our conversation time today, and I wondered if you could spend the next bit of time just summarizing the major aspects that we talked about, and for the people watching. Thank you.
Sure. Most importantly, it's sitting with that proposition of what if so-called disease is a significant, meaningful biological program? What if so-called disease is not a genetic defect? It's not a weak immune system. It's not over toxicity, which it's a touchy subject of toxicity, and we can certainly talk about that at some point. But barring extreme toxicity load, right? Subtle toxicity does not cause disease, right? So what if our bodies have special biological programs that are designed to enhance the biological functioning of the body? And then this enhancement comes about when you're in a biological conflict. And that biological conflict has many looks to it, depending on our story, our biography, where we come from, and also right here, right now, our existential situation that we find ourselves in, right? But that conflict comes about unexpectedly, and it has a highly subjective nature to it. But that unexpected distress that we can all relate to in some way or another, and we can relate it with other people in our lives, we can relate it to our animals, that unexpected distress is the catalyst that activates these special biological programs designed to assist us to adapt, to strengthen us, to give us that extra boost we sometimes need in the midst of struggle, right? And so it's recognizing these biological programs, recognizing the significant symptoms that the body gives us in this biofeedback loop to, one, get our attention that we're in a biological conflict, and two, and often the case is recognize when you're in a healing process, a natural healing process that is part of that biological program. And so that unexpected distress may slip by us, and we just might only have symptoms that arise after the fact. And that's the beauty of it. When you're in a distress, you don't have time to get sick, quote unquote. You're in it. You got energy to get through it. It's after we get through it is when the recovery comes. And in that recovery, that's where 90% of the symptoms that have been categorized as disease. And there's a list of these wild names, crazy names, describing certain disease after disease after disease after disease, to books that are this thick describing disease and their symptoms, can all be pushed aside and just look at the symptoms, what they truly are, guiding you back, guiding you forward in your own self-healing and in an empowered state where nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can take this knowledge away from you once you have it. Nobody. I think those are pretty good. This is pretty good to have as we continue forward in this current state of affairs. But
That was a
finish up
great
with that,
summary.
Kathleen.
That was a great summary. It is an integral part of whom we are. It's our connection to ourself. That's where the empowerment comes from, and no one can take that from us. And that in and of itself is the beauty of German New Medicine, and participating in the process of allowing and participating in our body to heal itself.
Right.
It's quite brilliant, is it not?
Phenomenal.
It is.
Phenomenal.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. Did you have anything else you want to say at this moment, or we'll just...
I think that was pretty good for our first go around.
I think it was. So folks, stay tuned. This is part 1 of a series on German New Medicine with Chris Lowthert. Thank you, Chris.
Yes.